Ladies and gentlemen, the subject before us tonight is one on dragons, dinosaurs and DNA. And the outline of this talk is as follows. Why is this issue important? And it's important because there is a controversy between what is the biblical worldview, the view of time that we get in the Bible, and the view of time that's taught in our schools and in our universities. There is a controversy. I don't think we can get round it. The second thing is, of course, we ask ourselves the question, what are the fossils? And we're going to look at some of the facts about the fossils and some of the theories, and then some remarkable new findings that have been coming to light in the last few years, and some of them in the last year, about DNA, some soft tissue, squishy tissue, and carbon-14 in dinosaur bones. And then we're going to look at some dragons and dinosaur sightings in history, and then make some conclusions. So that's where we're going tonight. And I think to show you the level of the controversy, I think we start tonight with the Bible. And of course, the first book, Genesis, in chapter 1, always controversial. Genesis 1 teaches creation from nothing. Only God can create from nothing. And it says it took 6 days. And we also find in Exodus 20:11 where God himself is speaking, and actually God himself is writing. And we find these words, "For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth, the sea, and all that in them is." So not millions of years, not thousands of years. Of course, if God is all-powerful, he could have done it in 6 seconds, couldn't he? If he's all-powerful. Why did he take 6 days? But he told us, he tells us that it was 6 days. And in fact, if you add up the genealogies in the book of Genesis, you come out with an age of the world, age of the earth, that is thousands, but not millions or billions of years old. And it's not just the Old Testament, but the Lord Jesus Christ taught in the New Testament. Remember that text when they asked him about marriage, to establish that marriage was between one man and one woman. He said, from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. And the point is, it's not billions of years after the beginning of creation. And the Apostle Paul taught in the New Testament, whereas by one man's sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. So here we have a quotation establishing the fact that there are not millions of years of death and suffering as one organism develops into another, but rather that the world was created perfect and sin led to death, not the other way round. Death led to man. Of course, the modern scientific worldview is very different. Here's a slide showing the geological column. And you can see there at the very bottom, we've got the Cambrian period, about 500 million years ago, right up to the age of the dinosaurs, Triassic, running from 245 million to about 65 million, Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous. And there's the dinosaur era. Very, very far back in time from where we are found today. That's the modern scientific worldview, taught in geology in our schools and in our universities, that this column of fossils was laid down over millions of years. And of course, that's where the evolutionary story comes from, because it's a naturalistic account of how we developed over the geological time. There's an old Earth predicated on that, and the current estimates are about 4.6 billion years old, is the usual estimate for the age of the Earth. Death must occur before man in this scenario. You've got millions of years of death, billions actually, 500 million years of death there before you get to man. So the point is this, which is correct? And what about all those fossils? How do we explain those from a biblical point of view? So that's where we're going in tonight's talk. The issue is important for the Christian because if you believe the Bible is inerrant, it's true, then you've also got to believe that it's inerrant when it comes to its timeline. It can't be massively out on something like this. And many people have asked the question, well, if I cannot trust the Bible on page 1, where it says 6 days, or in the book of Genesis, where it's talking of thousands of years, well, how can I be sure about the rest? When does it start becoming true? And that's a problem for many. And of course, the key question tonight we're going to look at is this: is there any scientific evidence against this idea of millions of years? So let's look at the fossils, shall we? There's a picture of a fossilized jellyfish. Now, normally a jellyfish, if it dies, within a few days it's gone. No trace, just dissolved, eaten up by predators, and so on. Here we've got a jellyfish that's been turned into rock. How did that happen? Well, if it was by the normal processes of death and decay, it wouldn't be here. Jellyfishes just dissolve. Something happened to suddenly kill it and then suddenly bury it in sedimentary rock, rock that's been laid down by water, in this case sandstone. So you've got a catastrophe there, sudden death and sudden burial. And all the fossils are found in a sedimentary rock layer that is all over the earth. It's a thin layer compared to thick layers of magma and igneous rock and metamorphic rock. You've got a thin layer of sedimentary rock all over the earth. And that rock was laid down by water. Did you know that 95% of all the fossils are in fact marine, like, for example, shellfish and other marine organisms? And 4.75, these are approximate figures, are algae and plants. About 0.2% are invertebrates, like insects. And there are only a very small proportion of the fossils that are vertebrates. And in that number, there's about 12 to 1,400 dinosaur skeletons. That may have moved on a little bit in the last few years, but of that sort of order. Those are approximate figures. And here is a famous freeze frame fossil. This is an ichthyosaur. You can see there's mum and there's baby. And it's in the process of being born. So clearly that didn't take millions of years. That animal is in the process, that dinosaur is in the process of giving birth. When something has happened, it's been killed and it's been suddenly buried and its photograph has been left as a fossil. So sudden death, rapid burial in a watery environment. That's what the evidence says. Of course, what does the Bible say? Well, it does speak about a worldwide extinction event. Behold, I, even I, bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh in which is the breath of life from under the heavens. Everything that is in the earth shall die. And we find a sedimentary rock layer over all the earth with billions of dead things there captured. And of course, some people would say, well, the flood in Genesis was only a local flood. But the account itself says this: all the high mountains under all the heavens were covered. And the flood, Jesus himself taught, as it was in the days of Noah, and the flood came and destroyed them all. He believed in a worldwide catastrophic event, destructive event. That's what he said in Luke's Gospel. The Apostle Peter said the world that then was, not the local world, the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. So the Bible is teaching here a cataclysmic event of worldwide proportions. So what about the fossils then? Where do they come from? Here we see not a fossil, but actually a living fossil. What do I mean by that? Well, in the fossils we find that species appear abruptly, without any transitional forms, mainly, fully formed, and they remain the same for millennia. And the best example, or very good example, is the coelacanth. Now, this was thought to be extinct 65 million years ago. So if you look at early textbooks of the first part of the last century, they would refer to the coelacanth as a kind of dinosaur fish, huge fish that is now extinct at the age of the dinosaurs. And then there was one found swimming around off the coast of East Africa in 1938. It was alive. It was very much alive. And since then, there's been other ones. This one was caught off the coast of East Africa in Nairobi. And the point is this, that the ones that are alive today are identical with the fossil examples that we believed were 65 million years old. So, you've got two possibilities. Either it hasn't evolved for 65 million years, or something is wrong with the dating method so that those rocks in which these fossils were dated from are not that old, or both. And I believe it's, in fact, both. The simple explanation is that the reason why the coelacanth is the same now as it is in the fossils is that there's not 65 million years of gap between the fossils and the living specimens. And that's one of several living fossils which have stayed the same over supposed vast eons of time. So what about the fossils? Remember the tsunami just shortly after Christmas Day, about 9 years ago, 10 years ago? 250,000 people approximately were killed by one tsunami. Let's suppose that you had something happen to the world in which there were 10 tsunamis. Let's suppose that there was such tectonic movement of the Earth's plates that several of these things were triggered. It's very easy to see, isn't it, how that the whole of the planet, or certainly those who live by the sea, would be very easily killed. If 250,000 people can be killed today, what about if you had several of those tsunamis at one point in time? And of course, the fossil record is best understood in terms of a worldwide flood that destroyed the continents and the land dwellers, of which we have an eyewitness account from one of the survivors in the book of Genesis. It fits all the facts. It explains all the data. And actually, there are at least 500 flood stories from different civilizations around the world. The American Indians, the Australian Aborigines, the Chinese, various ones in the Middle East. And they all have the same elements as what we find in the Genesis account, which of course is the most comprehensive because that's the one that's recorded by an eyewitness. And the facts there that we know support the biblical account very well indeed. And Christians for centuries, of course, did believe that the fossils were laid down by the flood. It was only in the 18th and 19th century that that belief was challenged. So is there any other evidence that's inconsistent with the millions of years? Well, actually, there is. And the dinosaurs provide that evidence. We find that we have found in the last 20 years that we've found samples of dinosaur fossils where there's soft tissue, squishy bits, I suppose is the best way to refer to it, and fragile chemicals, and actually DNA in October 2012 was reported to have been found in dinosaur bones. And the fragile chemicals, you and I, again, if we die within 20 years, normally after burial, there's no trace. And of course, these fossils are supposed to be 65 million years old. C14 in dinosaur bone. Carbon-14 is a clock. It measures how old things are. And the point is, if there is any carbon-14 in something, it cannot be millions of years old. And of course, when we look at the evidence also from antiquity, we find there are dinosaur drawings and carvings and actually reported sightings of huge beasts. They don't call them dinosaurs because that word was only coined in the 1850s by Sir Richard Owen, who built the creationist, who built one of those who was responsible for the Natural History Museum in London. So we shouldn't expect to find the word dinosaur in antiquity, but we do find descriptions of great beasts. So what do we mean by soft tissue? If you've got soft tissue preservation in fossils, it implies extremely rapid geological processes, sudden death and sudden burial and low decay over the time period. And what has been found? Well, this is a photograph there, 50 micron scale shown on the photo. Pliable blood vessels, blood cells, proteins, they degrade very quickly under normal circumstances at death, and DNA. DNA repairs itself, but when you die, it stops repairing itself. It is soluble in water. And consistent with an age of thousands of years, not consistent with 65 plus million years. That's the youngest dinosaurs, 65 million. The Triassic ones are 190 million years old. And of course, you can check it on the internet. This is well documented. This is not publicized by wacky scientists somewhere. This is published in journals such as Nature, such as Science. One of the leading scientists involved, Mary Schweitzer at the University of North Carolina, has made these discoveries, and she has been quite strongly resisted over many years, but she's a very determined lady, and she's done test after test after test after test to show, in fact, that these findings are correct. Some ideas die hard, of course. She said this: it was exactly like looking at a slice of modern bone. But of course, I couldn't believe it. I said to the lab technician, the bones are, after all, 65 million years old. How could blood cells survive that long? There is a simpler explanation, and that's that the 65 million years is not secure. The blood vessels are there because they're not 65 million years old, possibly. Of course, that is not yet admitted by the scientific community. So let me tell you how carbon dating works. Have you ever boiled an egg? Have you ever used an egg timer? That's how simple carbon dating is. When the sand gets through the timer, you take the egg off the heat. 3 minutes normally, or if you like a real hard one, you can keep it in for 4 minutes. Now, how does carbon-14 work? Well, when something dies, it stops breathing. Do you agree? When you die, you stop breathing. That's a definition of death. So when something dies, it stops breathing, and the carbon-14 content of the plant or of the animal starts to decay. So it's a bit like the sand running through the top half of the egg timer. And after about 5,700 years, half of the sand is gone. After another 5,700 years, radiocarbon years, another half of the sand is gone. And in fact, after about 10 times that period of 5,700 years, we can't measure anymore, except on the very, very sensitive instruments, that any more radiocarbon. And so I looked on the internet a few years ago, and the oldest date I could find measured was about 63,000 years, radiocarbon years before the present. So what that means is, if there's any sand left in the top, or if there's any carbon-14 left in the bone, it cannot be more than 100,000 years old. I'm being generous here with my upper estimate. I couldn't find a date when I looked a few years ago that was greater than 63,000 years old. Of course, the technology is improving. It may be a bit greater than that now. If you want to check it out, How Stuff Works is a good site there. So we know then that carbon-14 decays with a half-life of 5730 years. The maximum sea age is less than 100,000 years. So if dinosaurs have been extinct for 65 million years, there could not be any trace of C14 left. But there is. It's measured. And if you want to check out the website, it's there on that slide. There's Otis Klein, one of the researchers who runs the museum, Dinosaur Museum in Montana, and he's slicing up a Triceratops bone, which has been tested for radiocarbon ages. And there, I put the table up, it's very busy, but it's to show you that this is not just one sample. These are samples from Texas to Alaska, and of course there are other samples from Belgium, from China, and Russia, which have got measurable amounts of carbon-14 in them. They are not millions of years old. So that is evidence which is inconsistent, scientific evidence which is inconsistent with the modern or the modern scientific worldview of millions of years. But there's more. Dinosaurs in an ancient Cambodian temple. This provides evidence that humans and dinosaurs have coexisted. There's the temple, you can go and visit it. And if you look at some of the pillars there, we're just trying to show you where the red arrow is, what you find is a picture, a carving in the temple of a Stegosaurus. Not alive today. Very similar to the dinosaur that you'd see in your book if you were going to look at one. Now, it was a human who made the carving. He copied a beast that was around at the time. I find that very compelling. Do you? Let's think about history. St. John the Damascene is a church historian dating from the period of the early church, and he wrote this from the story of the Roman Empire when they were besieging Carthage. I'll read it for you. One day when Regulus, a Roman consul in the 3rd century BC, was fighting against Carthage, a dragon suddenly crept up and settled behind the walls of the Roman army. The Romans killed it by order of Regulus, skinned it, and sent the hide to the Roman Senate. When the dragon's hide was measured by order of the Senate, it happened to be amazingly 120 feet long, and the thickness was fitting to the length. No beast alive today has got a hide that's 120 feet long, but you find, of course, a dinosaur would. What about good old St. George? And of course, there are many, we call them legends, but legends are often based upon fact, where you've had heroes of antiquity who fought some great beast and killed it and overcome it and so on. And you get those sort of legends in China particularly, and of course in the West as well. Could those have been dinosaurs, in fact, that were seen off by these heroes of yesteryear? In the Bible, we have a description of a creature that's called Behemoth. It's in the book of Job, possibly the oldest written book in the Bible, certainly dating from the time of the Pentateuch. Look now at the Behemoth which I made along with you. He eats grass like an ox. See now his strength is in his hips, and his power is in his stomach muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. His bones are like beams of bronze, his ribs like bars of iron. He is the first in the ways of God. And that's recorded in the book of Job. Behemoth, great beast there. Another eyewitness account. Let me make some conclusions then on this, I think, a fascinating topic and one that is worthy of further investigation. There's no escaping in my mind that there's a real controversy between what the Bible teaches and what the modern scientific worldview is when it comes to timing. Now, Christians may disagree about the exact age of the earth, but there's no way, I think, that we can escape the controversy between the Bible view, which is thousands, and the modern scientific worldview, which is millions or billions. I don't think there's an easy way to solve that one. And of course, the Bible is clear in the New Testament that there cannot be millions of years of death and suffering before man, because that undoes and affects our understanding of the gospel. Christ came in order to solve the problem of sin and of death that was brought in by our first father, Adam, the progenitor of the human race. And dinosaurs, like many other species, they're now extinct, but we find eyewitness reports from antiquity. There are others as well, but we've looked at one tonight. And the evidence that we're finding, recent scientific evidence, just doesn't fit with the millions of years old Earth. Blood cells in unfossilized dinosaur bones. Carbon-14 in dinosaur bones, and actually dinosaur DNA recently established in the last year or so. This doesn't fit with a millions of years old Earth, but it is experimental data which is entirely consistent with the Bible. Creation from nothing, thousands of years ago. There was a worldwide extinction event. It's the biblical flood, which was responsible for laying down the sedimentary rock layers which are all over the earth, and their fossils, and of course including the dinosaurs. And the bottom line is this: Christians, you can and you should believe your Bible as intended by its divine author. And that is the message, really, of Dinosaurs, Dragons and DNA. Thank you.